So for today's video, I really want to revisit the drive gauge we talked about before, but now we have so much more additional information now that we can see the HUD for the game, and this is the heart of Street Fighter 6, so it's really important that we all understand it. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to check out my previous video where we covered a new mechanic called Punish Counters. It's really cool. It's going to encourage a more footsie neutral style for Street Fighter 6. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. And I guess before we start, I should do the disclaimer. Once again, guys, I have not played Street Fighter 6 myself. I'm just a guy who sees things and likes to talk about it. At least for now, unfortunately. But if there's something that I haven't seen and it's just like word of mouth, of course I'll let you guys know in the video. And this is all subject to change. Very early build of Street Fighter 6. And once I finally get my hands on the game, I'll revisit all these topics and explain it better, synced up with what I'm talking about, yada yada yada. Alright, let's get started now. So in case you guys have been out of the loop on this whole drive system, let me re-explain everything. So at the very top of the screen, just below your health bar, is a new resource meter called the drive gauge. This is a separate meter from your super meter, which is at the bottom of the screen now. Super meter is only used for super moves. Even EX moves, which are called OD moves now, they use your drive gauge at the top. On top of that, your drive gauge consists of 6 bars total, or 6 pips, and it begins maxed out at the beginning of each round. So this is not like a comeback mechanic bar. Alright, so you know what the drive gauge is. Now what is it used for? So in Street Fighter 6, you have a whole bunch of universal mechanics, or abilities, if you will, that take up different amounts of drive gauge. So you have like drive impact, that's like your focus attack, your drive parry, which is a parry, your drive reversal, it's like a get off me move, like a V reversal in Street Fighter 5, and even your EX moves called overdrive or OD, that takes resources as well. All these drive abilities will take a different amount of meter. The highest costing one is your drive rush, where you're literally able to dash cancel out of certain attacks. And then there's like the lowest costing, which is like a parry, which like starts off with half a pip basically. What makes this resource meter really interesting and unique compared to other fighting games is that when it runs out, you have a very huge negative effect. This adds a really cool risk and reward factor to the game. Since there's so many abilities in the game, it's going to give you a lot of freedom to do what you want and how to spend the bar. A really huge request from even myself on what kind of mechanics I wanted in Street Fighter 6. A lot of people like to use the groove system from CVS2 or the ism system from Alpha 3 as basically a cool way of adding more expression to the game and having different ways to play your characters. But Capcom has figured out a way to have all of these kind of systems at once without the consequence of maybe one of these specific grooves or isms being more powerful than the other. And they had to be able to dodge that whole balancing headache, and now everyone has access to all these moves at once, which is a really cool idea. All right, back to the info dump now. Let's talk more about how this drive gauge works. So we know what to use it for. Now, how do you get that meter back? So naturally, during a match, your bar is going to replenish itself all on its own. Even if you aren't doing something, if you're just standing there, your bar is going to slowly start refilling. There are small moments during the match where the recovery is going to freeze for a moment. Usually it's like when you just spend the drive gauge, it takes just a small moment to start picking up again. Or it pauses when your character is like stunned in the air or being crumpled or something. Usually it's like right before they touch the floor, and as soon as they hit the ground, it'll start refilling again. There are some weird cases though where the bar is still refilling when you think it wouldn't. Like during a cutscene of a level 3, like the character that's doing the level 3 super, I'll see their bar like still refilling as the screen is like frozen. I don't know if they're gonna change this. Or even during like supers that aren't screen frozen with the cinematic thing, like Jamie's like his dance level 1 super where he's doing all those kicks and he's dancing, his drive gauge is still like replenishing slowly as he's hitting the opponent. So like I said before, the way the drive gauge naturally replenishes on its own is a little slow. So how do we speed this up? Well, there's an offensive way and a defensive way. The offensive way is simply just attacking your opponent and playing the game. It doesn't matter if your attacks hit the opponent or if they block it, you're going to gain extra drive gauge for that. Even when you throw them, you're going to gain some extra drive gauge. And the defensive way is by doing a successful parry. It doesn't matter if it's a perfect parry or a normal parry, you're going to naturally gain more drive gauge each time you parry. Quite a bit. So obviously this makes sense. I mean, we don't want players turtling all day. We want to reward players for being more offensive. Even when you're zoning with fireballs, if the opponent's blocking your fireballs, you're going to gain extra drive gauge for that. All right, moving on, let's talk about the more important part and more interesting, and that is how to drain the opponent's drive gauge. And yes, you definitely can, and there are many ways, so let's talk about them. So the main way to drain the drive gauge is to force your opponent to block anything. So blocking drains your drive gauge. Even light attacks will drain your drive gauge. The higher the strength of the attack will, of course, drain it more, and this includes special moves if you're blocking supers. If you haven't noticed by now, there's no chip damage in this game. Well, there is, but we'll get to that. But basically, your chip damage is converted into the drive meter instead, which is very interesting. So being overly defensive has a consequence. You're losing drive gauge more and more. On top of that, in Street Fighter V, basically, when you block too much, you got gray health. But the thing is with gray health is that you can replenish it and it can reward you over time. But in this game, basically the opponent is reaping the returns immediately. You're losing that drive gauge and it ain't coming back unless you do something about it. However, getting hit by attacks does not drain your drive gauge. So if you get hit by normal attacks, special moves, throws, you will not lose drive gauge for it. Even if you're counter hit, you will not lose drive gauge for it. I guess Capcom didn't want this game to be super snowbally, because if you're dominating your opponent, they'd be in serious trouble. If you land a really fat combo, you would drain so much of their bar. I don't think Capcom wants to go in that direction. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they changed how the stun works, which we'll also get into. There are some key attacks, though, that will in fact drain your opponent's drive gauge, but they're a little bit more rare. So one is landing that punish counter. So we talked about this in my previous video. If you land any punish counter on somebody, even a light punish counter, they're going to lose drive gauge for it. If in case you guys don't know what a punch counter is, it's basically when you get hit during the recovery of your attack. That's when your attack it's basically a punish. When your attack is finishing and you're opened up for an attack. If you get hit by a super that also drains your drive gauge, the amount of drive gauge you lose depends on how much damage the super is. So obviously, like if you get hit by a level 3 super, you're going to lose a lot more drive gauge. And then the core mechanic, drive impact, this also drains your drive gauge. If you get hit by this, you'll lose about 1 bar if you just get hit raw. And if you get the huge like crumple version where you get counter hit or punish countered, you're going to lose like 1.5 pips from that, because the punish counter is basically stacked on top of, getting hit by the drive impact in the first place. All right, now we talked about how you gain it, how do you lose it, what happens when this entire bar runs out. So when your drive gauge completely drains, you're put into what's called a burnout state. And during this burnout state, you no longer have access to any drive mechanics. I cannot overstate enough how bad that is. That means you cannot parry anymore. You cannot do your drive reversals anymore. You can't even do your EX moves anymore. You're in serious, serious trouble. Your character is flashing like gray and white. You have like these sparks around your face, so it's really obvious to your opponent that you're in trouble and you're in burnout. And on top of that, your character even changes their stance, which is really cool. And I guess the devs put these Easter eggs where the characters will use some of their old stance from previous titles. Max was talking about it. For example, Chun-Li, she'll go into her old school Street Fighter 2 stance, which is kind of funny because they're like basically saying these stances were weaker before. So when you're put in burnout state, your drive gauge is now replaced by this replenishing bar. And when this replenishment bar fully fills, you're now able to use your drive attacks again. You'll get your drive gauge back. But I cannot overstate enough, guys, how slowly this bar fills. You will probably not have a chance to refill it back. It's that damn slow. Thankfully, there is a way to speed this up, your replenishment bar, and that is if you're in burnout state, if you land attacks or block attacks, your bar is going to go up just a little bit faster. But basically, you got to play out of your mind. You're basically going ST styles, but at least you'll be rewarded because when that replenishment bar is fully filled up, you're going to get all 6 of your bars or 6 pips instantly back, and you can use your drive gauge again. Now, when I say blocking, I mean against normal attacks. See, there's a twist now. If you block special moves while in burnout state, you get chipped now because you have no drive gauge to drain. So you'll take chip damage from specials and from supers, which also means that chip damage kills are now back in Street Fighter 6. If you have no life left and you block a fireball, you're gonna die. If you block a super and you have no life left, you're gonna die. So burnout state is very dangerous in this game. It's gonna play a huge part. Believe it or not, that's not all. There is another big weakness about being in burnout state, and that is if the opponent wall splats you. So if they use a drive impact on you while you're in the corner, you will automatically be stunned. And that is at this time the only way you could be stunned in Street Fighter 6, and they're able to land a full combo on you. Now, after you're stunned and you recover from that stun, whether they didn't do anything, you fall on the floor and get up, or after they land that combo on you, you'll now get your drive gauge back and get all 6 bars instantly. So they have one shot. I can't imagine how dangerous that would be to be put into the corner while in burnout state. You're basically screwed, because if the opponent does the drive impact, the focus attack on you, even if you block it, you're going to be wall splat and then stunned. And since you have no parry, you can't defend if he does it like me, or he cancels it from a normal. I don't even know how you're going to get out of that situation. So I think you're just donezo. So you might be thinking, with all these weaknesses, why would I ever want to be in burnout state? Why would I ever want to spend that bar? There is one little like risk reward thing, and that's if you can overspend your drive gauge. So let's say you do a drive rush that costs 3 bars of drive gauge. If you only have one bar or 1 pip left in your drive gauge, and you do a drive rush there, you'll be put into burnout state, but the game will still let you do your drive rush. So you can kind of like get some bonus and take the risk, be put in burnout state, and use something that would have cost 3 bars for 1. Even if you play your cards right, I think burnout state is just going to be something you're going to see a lot. Even if you're a really good player, because just doing like your big combos in this game costs quite a lot of meter. So for example, if someone does an uppercut and you want to do like the fattest combo you can, you'll do something like a drive rush that leads into an OD. That's going to cost like 5 bars right there. That's almost your entire meter. Even a single drive rush is going to cost half your bar. And if the opponent lands like a bunch of, punish counters on you afterwards, or lands a big level 3 super on you, you'll be in burnout before you know it. The more I think about the drive gauge, the more I like it. I think Capcom thought of something really clever here, because it's not just like this resource meter that just refills over time. You get infinite resource, It's somehow this combination of replacing the stun bar, but also changing how chip damage works, right? Adding a bunch of different mechanics that require different amounts of meter, and interesting ways to drain your opponent's meter as well. It's going to create a lot of different decision making. It's going to make it so when 2 players play the same character, it's going to feel more unique. You're going to know, hey, this is this player's style, this is your style. It's going to distinguish yourself from players. And like I said before, it's going to add a lot of individual freedom. I don't think there's going to be like an optimal way to use this meter. It's going to be for you to decide. It's going to be your preference. So that pretty much wraps up all the info I have on the drive gauge so far. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts. What do you think about the drive gauge, this new system in Street Fighter 6? I hope you guys like this new drive gauge as much as I do. I think it's going to add a cool, unique twist to Street Fighter and make it feel more refreshing. Can't wait to get my hands on this game. But anyways, guys, let's wrap this up. As usual, I'll be posting videos every day, giving you guys more info on everything that is Street Fighter 6, and talk about these mechanics more in depth. Till then, guys, take care.